What's up everybody, welcome back. So a couple of weeks without a video, I had a short vacation and was really busy trying to get everything back on track after that. But from now on we should be good to go, and I'm gonna start uploading videos again, so there should be a new episode every week. So for today we're gonna create the in-game menu or the pause menu and make sure that everything works, pausing the game in single player, multiplayer and things like that. So let's just dive into it. First of all, we're going to go to the UI folder and I'm going to use the main menu to create my pause menu. So I'm simply going to duplicate the main menu and call it my in-game menu. And let's open it up. So for the designer part, we are pretty much good to go. All we need to do is change a few button names. So the first one is going to be the restart button to restart the game. So let's call this a restart game. And then we want to rename the actual button as well. So let's name it button restart. Then we're also going to create a button to go back to the game. So let's put the text in there, back to game. So if we want to unpause the game, and we're simply going to say, what have I called it? Button close menu. That's probably a good explanation for it. Close menu. Then we want a button to go back to the lobby if we're playing a multiplayer game. So we're going to change the text to lobby and then change the button name as well again. So button lobby. And the last one is the button for the main menu. So let's change the text in here. Nope. Main menu. And that's going to be the button main menu. So that should be good to go. Now, first of all, let's go to the graph and we're actually going to delete everything in here. So we don't need any of that stuff. So we can compile and save it. And first of all, we want to set up some other things before we go back to our in-game menu. So let's minimize this one. So we're going to need an input action to make sure that we can actually pause the game. So first of all, let's go to our inputs folder and the actions, and we're going to create an input action. So we can make a copy of the input action fire, for example, and then simply call this pause menu or pause game, whatever you want. So we don't need to change anything inside of the input action. It's a digital bool and that should be good. So we're going to save that one and then add it to our input mapping context. So let's open that one up, and we're going to add a mapping in here by clicking the little plus sign. All the way down, we want to change it to our input action pause menu. And then let's add some buttons for it. So first of all, I'm going to use the escape button. And I'm also going to add a second button because if we press escape in the editor, then it will actually close the entire game. So that's not going to be pretty useful. So I'm going to add a second button, and that's simply the P key on my keyboard. So let's add the P key in here, and that should be good to go. So with the input set up, we want to go to our player controller to add a function that actually shows the menu on the screen. So we're going to do that first. Go to the Mac folder and open our Mac player controller. So I'm going to grab my example in here quickly. What we can do is simply duplicate the UI show player HUD function. So let's duplicate that one, and we're going to call this show in-game menu. So let's get rid of the player HUD references in here, two getters and a setter. Then we want to change the create widget node to our in-game menu. So let's change it in here. Then we're going to drag off the return value and promote that one to a variable. So this is our widget blueprint in-game menu. And then we want to hook this one back up to the add to viewport. And we're going to grab a getter and plug it into the isValid node. And also plug that one into the add to viewport node. That's good to go. Then we want to make sure that we set the input mode to UI only. So we're going to drag off here and we're going to say set input mode UI only. So the bottom one. The player controller is a reference to ourselves, so we can just plug in ourselves in there. And we want the widget to focus to be our in-game menu, so we can plug that in over here. And then the last thing we want to do is show the mouse cursor. So we're going to say set show mouse cursor. And we're going to enable the actual mouse cursor. So we are on a player controller, so we can simply get it from here. That's good to go. We have our function in place. And the next thing we want to do is go to the event graph. And in here, we want to create a function that we're going to use a little bit later. If a client wants to leave a multiplayer game, he needs to destroy his session, and he needs to do that locally. So we want to create a replicated event on the owning client to destroy our session. So let's create a custom event in the event graph and call this owner destroy session. Over here. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we have our replication set to run on the owning client. And I'm also going to make this reliable. So enable the reliable tick box over here. So this will make sure this is most likely not failing. Then we simply want to destroy a session. So we're going to drag off and destroy session over here. The player controller is a reference to ourselves again. So let's plug that one in. And if the session is successfully destroyed, we want to go back to the main menu. So drag off the on success pin. And here we're going to say open level by name. And we're going to open our main menu map. So simply type in the name of your main menu level. Like so. Okay, that's good to go as well. Compile and save the player controller. And we have the setup in here done. Then we're going to go to our interface folder, and in here we're going to use the GameMode interface to add a function in here. So again, I'm going to switch my notes quickly. We want to get a function in here that tells us if we are playing a multiplayer game. So we're going to add a function and call this one get is multiplayer game, get is MP game. And we want to give it one output over here on the right side. And that's simply the boolean that tells us if it's a multiplayer game. So is MP game. That's good to go. Compile and save that one and close it down. The next thing we're going to do is go to our actual mech. So the player mech character. So let's open that one up as well. Inside of the mech folder, BP player mech. And in here, we want to go to our event graph. And we're going to set up the input action. So we're going to create the input action event over here. Let's see. That should be fine. Let's just put it here. So we're going to look for the input action. That's IA. And then in-game menu. Or pause game. PauseMenu. Fine. So that's the action event, not the value. So get the event for it. And if it's completed over here, we're going to drag off here and we want to call our player controller. So we're going to drag in a getter and we're going to show our in-game menu. So that's the function we created, UI show in-game menu. So because this is an input action, this will always execute on the local client. So that's why we don't need to make sure that this is replicated to the owning client, because inputs are always handled locally. So this should work fine. Then we're going to right click over here and we're going to get our game mode. So simply get this getter and we want to check if this is valid. So get an is valid node. Like so. We're going to plug that in over here. So if we are a client and we want to try and get the game mode, then this will return not valid. So we're not going to do anything if the game mode is not valid. If our game mode is actually valid, we're going to drag off here and we can use our interface to call our get is multiplayer game interface function. So we're going to plug this one into the is valid pin. And if this returns false, then we actually want to pause the game. And if we are playing a multiplayer game, then we're not going to pause the game. We're simply going to show the menu. So in here from the false pin, we're going to drag off and say set is game paused. set game paused, probably. Set game paused, this one, and enable the paused, so it's actually paused. So if we are a client, we're obviously always playing a multiplayer game, so in that case we don't want to do anything. So this should work fine. Let's compile and save that one as well. Now we need to go to our game mode and again do a little bit of setup in there. So we're going to go to the framework folder, open our game mode. And the first thing we want to do is set up our new interface function. So let's expand it over here and double click the get is multiplayer game function. And for this one, we can simply grab the boolean and plug it into the return node. Compile and save. And then we want to go to our event graph. And in here, we actually want to make a few changes as well, or additions. So I'm grabbing my notes quickly. There we go. So because at this point we're dealing with clients that can leave the game while the other players may still continue playing the game, we need to make sure that we remove those players from the arrays that we're using. So we have the player AI count array, all players, and the player controllers. So we want to make sure that we keep those arrays up to date if a player leaves. And the way that we're gonna do that is using event on logout. So let's just look for an empty spot somewhere. I'm gonna put it to the left over here from the post login event. So right click and look for on logout. This one. So this will return the player controller that exits the game. So the first thing we want to do is check if we are playing a multiplayer game. So we're going to grab a branch and plug in our isMP game boolean. And if this is false, we don't need to do anything special. So we're not going to drag anything off the false pin. For the true pin, we're going to drag off the controller and we need to cast it to our Mac player controller. So plug this into true pin and then we can find it inside of the array of all player controllers. So we're going to grab a getter for that array and we're going to find the controller that leaves the game, find item, plug that in over here. And at that point we know the index of the controller in that array, and that's also the index of the of that player inside of the players array, and the same index is used inside of the player AI count array because we made sure that we kept those arrays in sync when the player logged in. So now we can use that to make sure that we also remove the correct entry. So we want to get the player AI count first. We're going to drag off and set an array element. Plug it into the cast node over here. So the index is the return value from the find node. And the item that we're going to set in here is 9999. And the reason for that is because if we're finding new spawners for an AI, then we want to look for the player that has the lowest value inside of this array, and at that position we're going to spawn an enemy. So we want to make sure that this number is so high that it's not realistically met in game, so it won't be picked anymore inside of the find AI spawner. Then we're going to grab the player max, so all players, and again we're going to set an array element, so copy and paste it, plug it in over here. The index again comes from the find node, so we're going to plug that one into the index. And then we're simply going to set it to an empty value. So it's going to be an empty spot inside of the array. It's not valid anymore. And the last thing we want to do is get the all player controllers array and do the same thing. So again, set an array element, plug in the array, plug in the item over here, and we're going to remove that controller from the array. So the reason you want to make sure you do this one last is because otherwise we can't find it anymore inside of the array. So this is a node that will execute every time a pin is hooked up to it. So the first time over here it's going to find the entry. For here this is actually going to execute again, find the entry and then plug it into the index. So if we remove it from the all player controllers array first, then it won't be able to remove it from these arrays because it can't find the correct index anymore. So if we would put this inside of a function, then we can use a local variable, store it inside of the local variable to make sure that it doesn't have to find the entry inside of the array 3 times, but only once. But we're not gonna bother with that for now. The last thing we want to do over here is get our player count integer, and we're going to decrement it to make sure that we have the correct amount of players stored inside of the player count as well. So that's our event on logout. And then we want to do something similar to what we did in the lobby menu for when a host actually ends the game. So if a host ends the game, we can't simply destroy the session for the host. First, we need to destroy the sessions for all of the clients. Otherwise, they won't be able to start a new session or join any sessions because they still have a session running. So we're going to create a custom event for that, and we're going to call this one host destroy session. Oh, almost. Like so. And then the first thing we're going to do is grab a for loop. So not a for each loop, but a normal for loop. Like this. The first index is going to be index 1, because index 0 inside of our player controllers array is always the host, and we want to skip that index. So the first one is going to be index 1. And the last index is going to be all player controllers, and then we can drag off here and get the last index. Nope. And hook that up over here. Then we need to make sure that the controller is actually valid, because we can have empty spots inside of the array because the actual client may have left the game before the host destroyed the session. So we're going to grab all player controllers again. We're going to get an entry, so get a copy of the index from the for loop, and the first thing we're going to do is check if this controller is still valid or not and plug it into the loop body. And if that controller is still valid, we want to call our owner destroy session. So that's the event we just created on the player controller to actually destroy the session for the client locally. So that's good to go. Then when the for loop is done, we want to make sure that the controllers have actually logged out, because this can take a little bit. And we don't want to destroy the host session before all of the controllers have left the game. So we want to create a function again that's called getValidControllerCount, so we can get the amount of valid controllers in the game. So we're going to create a new function, call this getValidControllerCount. Again, I forgot an O. There we go. And this is actually going to return the count. So let's give it an output. And this is the valid count, and that's an integer. Then we want to grab a for each loop for all of the player controllers. So we're going to get a getter for here and grab a for each loop. Okay, plug it in. And we simply want to check if this is valid. So we're going to drag off the array element. Is the controller still valid? Plug it into the loop body. And if it is, we're going to increment a local variable. So let's create a new local variable and call this local valid count. So that's an integer. And then we can simply grab that over here and increment it. Hook it up to the isValid pin. And then if the for each loop is completed, we're going to return the count. So we're going to plug in our local variable. And then if we go back to the event graph, when the for loop is completed, we're going to call this function. So getValidControllerCount, plug it into the completed pin. And we want to check if this is greater than 1. So we're going to drag off the valid count and do is greater than. Type in 1 over here, and we're going to add a branch. And if this is true, that means that not all of the clients have logged out yet. So then we're going to grab a small delay. So let's grab a delay, plug it in over here, and then plug the completed pin back into the valid controller count. So this is going to keep looping until all of the clients have actually left the game and there's only one player controller left, and that's the player controller of the host. So after that, we're going to grab a small delay again, 0.5 seconds, 0.2 should be good enough probably, but I'm going to extend it a little bit. And then we're going to destroy the session for the host. So we're going to drag off here, destroy session. So simply call the function over here. The player controller, we can get it from the array. So get all player controllers, and we're going to get a copy of index 0 because that's always the host. And if this is successful, then we want to open a level by name. So the host actually goes back to the main menu. So from the on success pin, open level by name, and that's our main menu map. There we go. So now we have an event that we can call if the host actually wants to end or quit the game. So compile and save the game mode as well. And at this point, we can go back to our in-game menu and actually set everything up in the graph. So let's go to the in-game menu. And I'm going to do the same thing in my example. So the first thing we need is event construct. So let's look for event construct. And we want to get the owning player of this widget. So get owning player, and this will return a player controller. So if you duplicated the main menu, we already have a variable in here called player controller, and we're simply going to plug that in and promote this to a player controller. So as you can see, that's the basic player controller. We don't need any reference to the Mac player controller. We are simply using the basic controller, so it's a light reference. Then we're going to grab a branch in here, plug it in, and the first thing we want to check if we are the server. So is server. If we are a client, we actually want to disable the button to go back to the lobby, and we also want to disable the restart game button because clients can't handle that. So we're going to drag off here and then set visibility, and we want to make those two hidden. So make sure you plug in both of them into the target, and this goes into the false pin. Then if we are the server, we want to get the game mode. So get game mode, right click in an empty spot, and we're going to cast it to our BattleMechs game mode. So cast to BattleMechs GM. This goes into true pin, and then we want to promote this to a variable as well. So drag off, promote to variable, and that's our BP BattleMechs game mode. And from here we can get our is multiplayer game variable. So we're going to drag off here, get is multiplayer game, the boolean, and we're going to promote this to a variable on the widget as well. So promote to variable is MP game, and plug it in so it sets it over here. Then we want to grab a branch and plug in the return value, and if this is a multiplayer game, if this is not a multiplayer game, then we want to hide the lobby button, because obviously in a single player game we don't have a lobby. So we're going to grab the button lobby, and we're going to set the visibility and make sure it's hidden, plug it into the false pin over here. So that's our event construct. Then we want to go to the button main menu. So let's select that one first, and we're going to add an on-clicked event. So if we want to go back to the main menu, first we want to check if we are the server or a client. So we're going to grab a branch, and we're going to do an is server check. First let's do a client. So a client can simply leave the game and go back to the main menu. He doesn't need to do anything special, and this is a widget. So a widget is always locally created and on the local client and the owning client. So in that case, we don't need our replicated event on the player controller. We can simply drag off here and destroy the session for the client. So look for destroy session. The player controller is the reference that we stored in here. And if this is successful, we're going to open our main menu map. So open level by name. Make sure you plug it into the on success pin and then open the main menu map. Then if we are a host, we want to check if this is a multiplayer game, because if we are playing single player, then is server will always return true. So then we're going to grab a branch and plug in our multiplayer game. So if this is false, we don't need to destroy a session because we're simply playing single player, so we can plug it into the open level and that should work fine. And if this is true, then we want to get our BattleMechs GameMode reference, and in here we're going to call our host destroy session event that we just created. So this will make sure all of the clients destroy their session and then the host as well. Okay, so that's the main menu button. The next one, let's do the restart game button. So button restart and an on-clicked event. And this is actually pretty simple. So only the host has this button because only the host can restart the game. So then we want to grab our function set buttons enabled. So this one transferred from the main menu when we duplicated the widget. And all this does is simply disable the buttons over here so we can't spam them. So we want to disable the button, so leave this one unticked. And then we're going to grab our player controller. And we want to execute a console command. So execute console command, this one. And the command that we want actually is built out of two strings. So we're going to drag off here and we're going to append a string. Look for append. So the first string is going to be server travel and then the name of the level where we want to travel to. So server travel. And then that's our basic level. So that's the simply the gameplay level that you're using in the project. So for me, I called that basic level. It's a bit of a weird name, I know. But that's what you want to type in here. And then the second string is going to be the player count, because we want to pass that on inside of the option string. So that was a few episodes ago where we introduced the option string and actually set that up. So what we can do is grab our BattleMechs game mode. From here, we're going to get our player count variable, so the integer. And we simply want to convert this into a string. So we're going to do toString from an integer. Then we're going to add a pin over here. So the option that we're setting is the player count. So we're going to do a question mark and then player count. And then we, let's see, we probably want to add a space or something in there, or an equal sign, sorry. So we're going to do a player count equal and then plug in the toString into the C pin. So this will make sure that the amount of players is set behind the equal sign. So compile and save. So this will make sure that we restart the game with the correct amount of players inside of our player count variable. And that's passed on as an option string that we set up a couple of episodes ago. Then we have the button lobby. So let's add an on-clicked event for that one as well. And again, that's not too hard. So we're going to grab our set buttons enabled to make sure that we cannot spam the buttons. We can only click it once. And then again, we're going to grab the execute console command, plug it in over here, and this time we simply want to server travel to the lobby menu. So server travel, and then our lobby menu map. So this is simply the name of the lobby level in your project. That's good to go. And the last thing we need is the close menu button. So again, add an on-clicked event for this one. And the first thing we want to do in here is grab a player controller reference, and we're going to set the input mode to game only. So set input mode game only. Over here, we want to hide the mouse cursor because we're actually using a widget as a mouse cursor. So set show mouse cursor, plug it in and make sure it's set to false. So you want to drag off the player controller to be able to set this. Then we're going to grab the game mode reference and we're going to check if this is valid. So is valid. Plug it in over here. So if this is not valid, then that means we are a client, because a client cannot get a reference to the game mode. And this is always locally. So if a local client doesn't have a reference to the game mode, we are actually on the actual client. And if we have a reference, then we are the host. So the first thing we're going to do is grab a branch, plug it into the isValid pin, and we're going to grab our isMultiplayer boolean. So if we are not playing a multiplayer game, then we actually have the game paused. So we want to unpause it. So we're going to set game paused and make sure that this is false. Then we want to remove the widget from the parent. So remove from parent. And the last thing we want to do is set the focus to the game viewport. So set focus to game viewport, this one. And that's good to go. Now we want to go back to the true pin, and if this is a multiplayer game, we want to skip the set game paused node, so we can simply plug it into the remove from parent node. And if we go back to the not valid pin for the game mode, we also want to plug that into the remove from parent node and simply skip the other two nodes. So this should make it work for clients and the host as well. Okay, this should be good. I'm not sure if I actually enabled the tick box on the other node. I may have done that. Yeah, I did. So that's good to go. So at this point, this should actually work. So first of all, I'm gonna grab a single player game and do a quick test, because there is one thing that I want to change, and we need to prepare the shaders. So this looks kind of crappy, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So if I hit the P key on my keyboard, then we get the pause menu, and I can go back to the main menu, for example. That works fine. But if I want to close the pause menu by pressing the P key again, that doesn't work. So we can only close it by hitting this back to game button over here. That works. But I want to make it that we can hit the P key or the escape key in a normal game, and the menu actually closes again. So what we want to do for that, and that's actually the last thing for today's episode, the first thing we need to do to make this work is go back to the designer. We're going to select the in-game menu over here, and we need to enable the boolean is focusable. So enable this one over here, compile and save. So inside of the player controller, when we show the in-game menu, we actually set the focus to this widget. So that's good to go. Then we want to go back to the graph, and we want to go to the functions and override a function, and that's our on key down function. So let's click on this one. And in here, we actually want to make sure that we close the menu if we press the correct button, obviously. So let's move the return node out of the way for now. What we're going to do is we're going to drag off the key event, and from here we're going to get the key that we pressed, so get key. Then we can get our enhanced input local player subsystem, so right click in an empty spot and get the enhanced, and then the input local player subsystem, and then the one that's not using the player controller. It doesn't really matter, but for this one we need to plug in the reference, and for this one we don't. So we're going to grab this one, and what we want to do first is check if this is valid. So grab an isValid node and plug it in. It should be, but you never know. Then if this is valid, we're going to drag off it, and we're going to query the keys mapped to an action. So let's look for query query keys mapped to action, so the first one in here. On this node we can select our pause action, so input action pause menu. So this will return all of the keys that we mapped to this action in our mapping context. So then we're going to drag off the array of keys, and we're going to find an item and plug in the key that we pressed. So if this key is inside of this array, that means we pressed either the P key or the escape key, and then we want to close the menu. So we're going to grab a branch, plug that into the isValid pin, and if this returns greater than or equal to 0, then we actually pressed a key that's inside of the array. So let's do greater than or equal. plug it into the condition. And if this is true, then we want to close the menu, and we can do that by creating an event inside of the event graph. So let's go back to the event graph. We're going to create a custom event over here, call it close menu, and simply plug it into the same nodes as we did for the on click button. So now we can call this event from the true pin over here, close menu. And then we want to plug this one into the return node, and for the return value we want to say that this input is handled. So we're going to do handled and plug it in over here. Then we're going to grab a second return node and grab all of the loose ends. So the false node over here, plug it in, and the is not valid pin over here and plug it in. And then we're going to return unhandled, so this input event is not handled yet. So that should be good to go as well. And again, this on key down event only works if we have the is focusable over here enabled and we actually have focus on the widget. But now if we go in game and go single player, if I press P again, it will actually close the menu. So that's good to go as well. So let's run a quick test with 2 players, for example. And let me see, so this is standalone, so that's good. So I'm gonna host the game over here and then find the game over here. So I'm not sure why the shaders are so messed up, but I'm not gonna bother with it for now. So we're gonna start the game as the host. There we go. And first of all, let's see if the client can leave the game. So we're gonna go to the pause menu for the client, and well, let's see if the back button works, and that works. Then I'm gonna hit main menu and the client will leave and the host can actually still play the game. So that's good to go. Oh, the freaking shaders, it's messing everything up. So let's go to the main menu for the host as well, and then again I'm gonna host the game and find the game. And we simply want to test all of the buttons inside of the menu to make sure that everything works. So let's start the game. And then I'm going to grab the host and I'm going to return to the lobby. So let's go to the host over here, pause it and go back to the lobby. And that's actually working as well. And then let's start the game again. So we want to test the restart button and then we should be pretty much good to go. So select the host over here, pause it and then restart the game. And there we go, the game restarts. So that should be good to go, and I think everything is working. So if the host goes back to the main menu, then it will go for the client first and then the host. And then the client should be able to host a new session. So that's also working. So that means the client session is successfully destroyed. Okay, nice. So we have the pause menu set up with all of the basic stuff and that seems to be working. So for the next episode, we're going to add a game over menu for when all of the players are dead. And we're actually going to expand this to be our game over menu. But we're going to get to that in the next episode. So thanks for watching everybody, and thanks for waiting a couple of weeks for a new episode. I don't plan on doing much of these 3-week pauses, but well, it's simply what happened. So I'm going to get back on track and upload a new video every week. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye bye.